absolutely delighted that you can be with us this evening to have and listen to the fantastic Professor Brian Dolan. So, Brian is an honorary professor in the School of Health and Society, and he has been a visiting professor since 2016. He got his OBE and the Queen's 2019 New Year's Honours List for services to nursing and emergency care. He is a nursing leader with over 30 years' experience in international health care environments and a key influencer on the sector of social media. Brian originated a global social movement called EndPJparalysis. This supports patients to get up, get dressed, moving while in hospital, thus reducing the risk, and deconditioning. 10 days in hospital can cause 10 years in muscle deterioration. And I've got to say, Brian, my mother just fractured her femur a few weeks ago, and I had her up straight away. We got her up and moving. Sorry, needed to share. EndPJparalysis ties into another more personal social movement which Brian created called The Last 1,000 Days. This considers the sobering thought that 1/3 of actually admitted, acutely admitted medical patients will be there in the last year of their life, poses the rhetoric question: if you had 1,000 days left to live, how many of these would you choose to spend in hospital? At Salford, we are incredibly proud to play our part in helping people to follow their passions and make a contribution to health and society. And we're so pleased that Brian can be with us. We really feel that universities are uniting forces in communities, bringing together people, providing them with opportunities to explore their passions and give them tools to make a positive change in their own lives. Salford University has a long history of an institution with an important role to play in providing the opportunity to groups of people who are underrepresented in higher education. We've recently published Salford Untold, our university's social and economic impact report. The report shows that over the past 4 years, 31% of our students who come to Salford University come from the lowest higher education participation background. Over a quarter have come to us with BTEC as their highest qualification, and 1/3 have come from low-income households. We feel we are transforming lives through education in some of the most deprived areas of Salford and Greater Manchester, and our commitment to outreach in the community is closest to our campus remains. Salford has a long and proud tradition of helping students to make that step from university and into the world of real work, and giving them life opportunities to make differences to their lives. We're also the fastest growing university in the Northwest and the 5th fastest in the UK. And just to share with you, recently the University of Salford achieved a doctoral training status for orthotics and prosthetics and is to lead the new centre of excellence in UK research. We are demonstrating that we can really punch our weight and others against others who have been more traditionally prestigious universities. We're honoured to have Brian as a visiting professor in the school. His values, passion and commitment to improving patient care is embedded in the school philosophy. I would like to welcome Brian to come and start his lecture, What Patient's Time is the Most Important Currency in Healthcare.
Thank you.
Professor Brian Dolan.
Thank you. And thank you all for being sent. I just picked this up because, you know, it's sat there and it said reserved. Isn't it really quite nice to know the temperament and personality of your furniture around here? So what we're going to talk about for the next 8 or 9 hours, we're going to see how this all goes. We're going to talk about why patient time is the most important currency in healthcare, and what I'm going to frame it around is time as the connecting currency, but also look at something that steals people's time, that is perhaps one of the greatest harm events that occurs on a daily basis in health systems, which is that of deconditioning and what its impacts are. And then a solution that was hidden in plain sight, which is around deconditioning. And then we'll circle back to the issues of language and also to the last 1,000 days, which I'll articulate later. Feel free to tweet if you wish, because it means my parole officer is happy that he knows where I am. But I can I also say thank you so much to Margaret and the university for hosting me, and to Richard as well. And it's a great honour having our Deputy Chief Nursing Officer for England, Hilary Garrett, join us, and folk like my co-author, Amy Overend, and my own very special guest, my own Sunday in every week. My son, Will, is here with us too, just to check up. And so let's just start walking through it. It's about patience time, and patience time being the most important currency. And people get very preoccupied that it's the money. You know, it's all you hear about, the deficit, and we don't have enough money. And in fact, it's actually not money that connects health systems. In fact, it is time. So how do we maximize time? How do we minimize wasted time? How do we minimize wasted patience time? But it's axiomatic to me that in order to value patience time, we must also value staff time as well. But what is it about time? You know, in fact, the currency is time. And how do we measure, for example, access targets, like waiting in the emergency department, or waiting to see a GP? Because waiting lists are measured in time. Referral to treatment, it's measured in time. Waiting to see a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a physiotherapist, these are all measured in metrics of time. And harm is frequently caused as a consequence of time ill spent. Waiting isn't passive, waiting is harmful. I think one of the real shames that with the 2000 NHS plan, when it was announced back in the previous Labour administration, and they talked about establishing targets, and I think that was a real shame in retrospect, because the framing was wrong, because targets set off a whole series of antibodies. If instead of talking about targets, we had talked about internal professional standards, we'd have come at it from a very different framework, paradigm. But harm is caused as a consequence of time ill spent, because waiting is not passive. If you spend less than 4 hours in an emergency department, you'll spend around 4.2 days in hospital. If you spend more than 4 days in 4 hours in an emergency department, although I did work in King's College in London in the 90s, and we used to say if the patients were there for more than 4 days, we'd put them on the off duty. I mean, that was when we had real bad waits. But if you make more than 4 hours, that's an average of 7.3 days. Somebody who is a medical patient on a medical ward will have an average of a 5-day length of stay. If they're a medical patient on a non-medical ward, their length of stay is 11 days. And the reason behind that is if you work in a medical ward, and particularly a respiratory nurse, you will pick up the deterioration of a patient with COPD faster than a surgical nurse. It just kind of makes sense. A medical patient on a surgical ward, who say in an orthopedic ward, you know, an orthopedic nurse will pick up compartment syndrome far faster than a medical ward nurse would, because we get good at what we do. We're specialists in what we are, and we miss stuff. It's actually related to surveillance. The reason we have specialized wards is about surveillance above all else, and patients in the wrong place it leads to their harm. And the longer somebody waits in a hospital, the longer they will wait. And stranded patients, you know, features of the so-called stranded patients, not the best of terms in many regards, but what are their features? They've got complex comorbidities, they've got more than one medical team looking after them, they've got more than one therapy team looking after them. There isn't a clarity of their plan, and their predictor of a long length of stay is they have a very long length of stay. And it's fantastic to see Elaine Inglesby-Burke here as well, an extraordinary nurse leader based in this parish. And we'll talk more about the EndPJparalysis and the impact it had, the impact data from the Northwest. And also seeing Alison Schofield and Steve Mosby here as well, who did some fabulous work in that space. Let's look at beds. How many beds in Salford Hospital? Can I just show Salford Royal, just to pick a local example? 900. So you'd think of any hospital you know of. I trained in the west coast of Ireland, for those who were ever wondering about the accent. Although I have had a taxi driver who asked me, which bit of South Africa are you from? So, well, you know. But no matter where you are, actually, this is also true. I've got the blessing of working in New Zealand, Australia, the UK, sometimes in Ireland as well. And this much I know, wherever you go in the world, Systems and hospitals have got the same thing. The same thing is, the only thing that really changes in healthcare is the accent. Does anyone recognize this hospital, for example? It's a recently restructured organization with an acting or newly appointed executive team. It's financially distressed. It's housed in a mismatched collection of totally unsuitable buildings which are currently being redeveloped. It's staffed by a cynical group of dysfunctional personalities who are bitter and cynical about any hope for improvement. However, everyone is united about the same common grievance, about parking. Wherever you go, it's always the parking. I was in Alice Springs about 6 weeks ago, and we were driving through, and we tried to find a car. 20 minutes later, we couldn't find a car park. I said, you work in a fucking desert. I mean, how could you not have a car park in the middle of those northern territories? But it's true wherever you go. But the other thing that's true is if you doubled from 900 beds to 1,800 beds, in Alice from 250 beds to 500 beds, no matter where you go, what do you think would happen if you doubled the number of beds in a hospital you can think of? What would happen within a year? You'd fill them, because build it, they will come. And what that means essentially is it's not beds that are really capacity. Actually, what constitutes capacity in a health system is senior decision makers, clinical decision makers, and senior action takers. That is what constitutes capacity. Because when you think about the language we use, what are we waiting for? Registrar review. We're waiting for the senior physiotherapist to come and see this patient. We're waiting for the clinical nurse specialist to come and look at that wound. Because no matter how hard an FY1 may work, or a newly qualified RN or newly qualified therapist, they cannot make decisions that will progress the patient to the next level of the system. And there's a fishhook in that, because never have we had a more experienced global workforce than we do right now. But Mark Britnell recently written a book called Human, and he worked with the Department of Health as it was back then. And he predicts it'll be up to 30 million of a shortfall of staff globally across the world in healthcare by about 2030. That is our greatest threat in healthcare. Not money, not facilities, absolutely people. And we have yet at this point an extraordinarily experienced senior workforce in our health system, but that's not going to last forever. So what we have is a collective responsibility to have a conversation between the generations, so that those of us who've got fewer days be ahead of us than behind us can be assured that those coming who follow behind will pick up our expertise, our wisdom, our knowledge as quickly as it can. That is part of our urgency. If you look at DNAs, if somebody doesn't turn up for a 2 o'clock appointment, you can't carry 2 o'clock into tomorrow, it's gone. But even on the day patients go home, they're waiting for ward rounds, they're waiting for discharge paperwork, they're waiting for scripts, and even the shocked relative who didn't know they're going home today. And then they're sitting, and they said, I'm going home today, and then they get there, and they're sitting there, and they're waiting, and then they're fretting about what? The parking. And I've yet to come across a pharmacist who, so the poor old pharmacy, they always get blamed, don't they, for everything. What are we waiting for? TTOs. And it's not like they're sitting there tapping their arms and thinking, geez, I'd love some work. Wouldn't it be great? It's actually about how we ensure our processes happen so that we don't waste people's time. But we're wasting time every single day. We're looking around for equipment. Have you ever had the experience where there you are running around the ward looking for an opus machine like a certain type of fly, and then you find two of them huddled together like survivors off the Titanic, and what have you done? Wasted your time. Waiting for people to call you back. Our medical and nursing and therapy colleges is a particular issue. Being involved in pointless meetings, something that doesn't happen in the Northwest, I know. And you know what? 70% of the NHS budget and global budget is spent on time. How many of you here are part-time? Tumbleweed went across the room. How many here are full-time? Vast majority. And what are the two connectors? Time. Because 70% of the budgets in health are spent on salaries and spent on wages. It is the purchase of our most precious thing, which is our time. But bring it back to patients' time. If you're working on a ward, we've all that experience where you think, oh my God, is it 11 o'clock already? Where has the morning gone on me? And if you're laying on a bed, actually the time crawls by. The time comes dripping slow. And the predominant emotion for people in a hospital actually is boredom. It's just boring. This is a great slide by a fantastic physio called Chris Tuckett. Health Physio is his at Health Physio is his handle, and he's done some wonderful. But it's absolutely true, isn't it? The differences of time, and if you think about it, different in settings, in an emergency department, where Liz and I have worked. If you want something urgently, what you mean is you need it now. Urgent on a ward is today. For social services, urgent can mean this week. And it's just different perceptions of urgency. But also, if you're at the end of life, time takes on even greater significance. And this is Simon Weldon, who's a chief executive in Kettering, and his feedback, he says, when you have a life-limiting illness, each moment becomes precious because waiting a minute feels like 10. Waiting 10 minutes feels like half an hour, and waiting half an hour feels like an eternity. Because it's patience, time is the most important currency, but your time is equally your most important currency. It's about spending it wisely. And what I'd like to do is show you a very brief 80-second film created by Will and his business partner, Asher. And what I'm going to do is show you this very short film for you to watch.
The day's almost over, the sky's about to show her the first glimpse of gold over waking up dreams. And thing is, I don't know why things that I felt so concerned with just let go and drift with the breeze. I've been running around looking for answers, and all of these days there still ain't enough. Like the moonlit late plains, let the questions just hang. All I need is time with your love. I've been running around looking for answers, and all of these days there still ain't enough. There ain't enough. Time with your love. There ain't enough.
You look at that short 80-second film and created by Will and Asher, and you see, if you like, a narrative arc across life. You're a couple with a very new child, then one running through the park and everything is all tickety-boo in their world, and you'll quickly have worked out that everyone's got a number. Because while that child is rushing to the park and the husband or partner just tenderly kisses his wife on the forehead or partner on the forehead, what none of them know is she has only 1,000 days. Or the three teenagers watching a match. Man United versus Barcelona, maybe. My home county even, from Mayo. And, the joy. And this film is quietly dedicated to my best friend, Mark Mandel, who died on the 26th of February, 2016. And he walked into University College Hospital in London with acute abdominal pain in June 2014. And by the time he was transferred back to Swindon, about 10 days later, they'd removed his descending colon, but they'd also found cancer in his liver, his omentum, his mesentery, and his lung. And for Mark, it was the question with Mark was never, because he was terminal from the get-go, but for Mark the question was never, what's the matter with you? Because that was well understood. It was, what matters to you? And what mattered to Mark was that he could see his three daughters growing up to be as big as they could be before he died. And then you look at the woman in the car, maybe she's reflecting, because each of these little scenes, you can paint your own picture, your own stories onto them. But maybe that woman is depressed. Maybe in 1,000 days, what she and nobody else knows, maybe she'll take her own life. Maybe she's gone to outpatients and they've said, look, we thought we had this thing, but it seems to have come back. And she's got to prepare herself for a conversation with her family. And then you see the couple dancing, all filmed outside the Royal Shakespeare Company in Stratford. And you see the couple, and his Asher's father and his new stepmother dancing. And then at the very, very end, and by the way, it's no coincidence that all bar the last scene are about people getting on living their lives. Because hopefully for all of us, life is this big. But the amount in healthcare and hospital is only that bit. And it's only at the very end a young nurse walks around with many thousands of days around, that she's got, and the clock ticks down to a woman. And what it asks is this, I would ask for you to say out loud, if only for the cameras, is to answer this question out loud, which is how many of your last 1,000 days would you choose to spend in hospital? What would that number be? Absolutely, for the majority of us, actually none at all. And I think if we were having more conversations with the public about complex comorbidities and long-term conditions, and it's fantastic Amy's involved in the panel for the long-term NHS plan as a clinician, having a clinician's voice around the table with policymakers. But if we were to say to people, you know, what we know of this condition, people get about 3 years, 4 years maybe. What would you like to do with that? And what do you think the public would say? They would probably say, I want to spend as little time in hospital as we can make it. And I think then we would start to really, really redesign how we think about healthcare and how we deliver healthcare to make it closer to their home. Because what we do is unintentionally, and there's a fantastic phrase, and I always credit Elaine for this, is because we kill people with kindness. It was because we keep them in bed. I want you to acknowledge the next 2 slides from a senior therapist, a physiotherapist called Derek Laidler in NHS Highland. Because we will do a special offer for you in the NHS, or indeed in any health system, if you come into a hospital, you stay in bed for a week as an older person. So this is what we'll do for you. We will take 20% off your quads power, you'll lose 1.5 kilos of muscle mass, and we'll take away 10% of your aerobic capacity. After 24 hours, you can lose 2.5% of your aerobic capacity. That is the ability for an older person to pick up a cup of tea. And we worry about hydration. So this stuff has consequences. Hospital inactivity is associated with a 48% increase in the risk of disability, an equal percentage increase in the risk of needing help with activities of daily living a month after discharge, 3 to 5 years of ongoing muscle weakness. There was a fantastic study done of 20-somethings in 1966 in Dallas who spent 3 weeks in a hospital bed as part of a study. 30 years later, in 1996, they were still found to have not fully recovered their aerobic capacity. So when you hear about getting volunteers to stay on a bed for a year because I want to test about what it's like for the science of going to Mars, you'll be kind of thinking, just don't do it. But, if you spend a week in a hospital bed as an older person, you have a 5-fold increase in the risk of needing institutional care. Deconditioning is the difference between going home and possibly going to a home. And we're not done yet, because hospital inactivity is associated with accelerated bone loss through demineralization of bone. Malnutrition, because when you're not mobile, you're not going to be burning calories. If you're not burning calories, people are not hungry. And a very high percentage of people leave hospital more malnourished than they come in. 30% of people who have medical admissions, have a medical admission, I've got delirium. Sensory deprivation, I talked about boredom as a real thing in hospitals. And incontinence, I'm still looking for the reference for this, by the way, but I'm assured that 50% of people who come into hospital who are over 65 will wet themselves or be incontinent within 24 hours. And I think what that then leads to is a smaller life, because they'll often then be given incontinence products. And they'll go home with those incontinence products, and they'll have lost confidence, and they won't go out, and they won't go to Tesco's, they won't go to the pub, because they'll think, actually, supposing something happened to me again. And their lives end up smaller. Time is the connecting currency. This is a model that Linda Holt and myself co-created. And today's model is framed as a change model around time, and that's what it connects it. And where this comes into EndPJ paralysis is actually, if we can end PJ paralysis, people come into hospital, they get in their pajamas, and then they're paralyzed in their pajamas till the day they leave, and we steal their time. But it all started with a tweet back to some colleagues. There's 3 fabulous people, Pete Gordon and Tim Gillett, who work for the Emergency Care Intensive Support Team, and Anne-Marie Riley, Deputy Chief Nurse in Nottingham. And I'd been in Nottingham in October 2016. They started having conversations about getting things going. I was in the Broken Hill in the New South Wales outback, got this tweet, replied to them, and I said, actually, nursing was born in the church and raised in the army, but we put people in a pajamas, that is their uniform. Let's fix that, which within a few days turned into EndPJ paralysis. And in fact, its lineage goes back to the first book I wrote back in 1993, because I'm that old. about Project 2000 investigation, but that is the birthplace in many respects, so it's Broken Hill. But we've actually known about deconditioning since before the birth of the NHS. When Richard Asher, Jane Asher's father, wrote a paper called The Dangers of Going to Bed, before the NHS was even founded, this physician wrote about it, and he didn't talk about deconditioning, but he talked about it's always assumed that the first thing in any illness is to put the patient to bed. Hospital accommodation is numbered in beds. Illness is measured by the length of time in bed, and doctors are assessed by their bedside manner. He said, bed is not ordered like a pill or a purge, but is assumed as the basis for all treatment. And then he goes on to say, yet we should think twice before ordering our patients to bed, because underneath the blankets lie formidable dangers. And he went across all the body systems, and there was not a single body system that was not impacted by deconditioning. Peristalsis slows down when people are in bed, which means they're more likely to get constipation. The only part of our body that's physiologically designed to withstand sustained pressure is the soles of our feet. So pressure sores are more likely. Skin integrity is compromised. And lethargy, he talked about lethargy. People, you get bored with being bored. Well, that is a real thing. So there was no physical, you're more likely to get pneumonias because the VO2 max reduces. People, you can lose 15 to 20% of blood volume in a single week. Now, when people have a fractured neck of femur, picking up Margaret's point about her mum, most fractured neck of femurs that occur in hospital, and 1 in 25 of all fractured neck of femurs in the UK occur in a hospital setting, most of them occur on the last day or the second last day of admission. Why? Because people have got up, they've got going, they've got excited, but they drop their blood pressure, they do all kinds of things. I think if we targeted deconditioning, we would actually reduce falls that lead to fractures in half. That is one of our challenges. If we look at our data, find when they're occurring, and then trace backward what is the real arc, my argument would be it is this. Now, of course, we can keep them in bed. That's one way of keeping people really safe. But actually, we're then talking about risk, and the question is, whose risk is it? We worry about the risk. And if that's not good enough, then they will throw in capacity as well. So it's about whose choice, whose risk, why not home, why not today? But what do we do to people? If you've ever wondered why it's called ICU, now you know. Because what do we do to people? We put them in the most horrible, vulnerable-inducing piece of cloth that could ever be invented, and people feel disadvantaged. They are no longer somebody with a role in society. They are now reduced to a compendium of clinical symptoms. And they feel diminished, and they feel they can't speak up, because this may be our normal space when it comes to hospital settings. It is not the public's. The balance of power, when we talk about patient partnerships, it's kind of nonsense to see when somebody's in a uniform like that. It just doesn't hold together, does it? And so people may own their sickness, but they don't own the narrative of where it's going to be taking them. And when you start generating these conversations, and initially it was the four of us, Pete, Anne-Marie, myself, Tim Gellert, and Linda Holt as well in the mix. And then Jane Cummings, through thanks in many respects to Hillary, Jane Cummings, the now retired CNO for England, wrote a blog saying why we should support EndPJparalysis just 3 or 4 months after we started. And then it hockey sticked up. Great folk like Elaine were really, really early adopters of the campaign. And when people believe what you believe, they will follow you. And people like Courtney Baines in Cambridge University Hospital, who has a thing about, in Addenbrooke's Hospital, so he rebadged his hospital as Addenbrooke's, because he has a thing about Lego. And when we talk about hearts and minds, it's in that order for a reason. One unhappy patient, one happy patient just going around the ward singing New York, New York, and making it fun. This was one of their most shared ever pictures. And what happens is then hospitals would say, we really love this poster, is it okay if we use it? And Courtney very generously said, if you send us your logo of your organization, we will happily use it. You've got it here, haven't you? You had it here, I think. 400 hospitals around the world are using this. I was stuck not stuck, so badly put. I was in Murrumbidgee, in a place called Wagga Wagga. They've got great names of places in Australia. And there it was, the picture with their local badge. This is a picture, to my mind, created by Peter Kennell, another COMS officer in Northampton, of cognitive shift. Because if you see somebody in a hospital bed, it tells you that they are unwell. But if you see somebody up and dressed, and what we picked up from the campaign in sort of soft intel was that more people were being discharged on a Saturday, because it's really hard for a registrar to say to somebody like that, oh, we'll see how you are on Monday morning. Because the shift that occurs is people think they look better. The family come in and say, my God, you're looking fantastic. The patient is thinking, yes, I am good. And as a good friend of mine says, Michelle, you know, what woman wants to be seen in a hospital bed by her friends, by her family, in a gown or a pajamas when she's not even wearing her lipstick or a bra? So there's a key dignity element to this as well. People creating leaflets. This is from the Royal Free. Linda and I co-created a workbook. I can announce this evening we're going to be writing a book which will be provisionally called The Last 1,000 Days, Make Patient Time the Most Important Currency. We're going to write a book this year on it. It'll only be about 40,000 words, but we're very, very passionate about this, and the co-thinking we've been doing already is about how do we get this message to amplify to a wider audience. And here is Chloe Harris. Chloe was then, about 2 years ago, a new graduate, 18 months ago, a new graduate physiotherapist. And in respect to her grandfather, she said, you know, my granddad never ever wore pajamas during the day. But what would it be like? And when he was in hospital, I said, oh no, you should stay in pajamas, really, honestly. And she said, what would it be like for staff to wear them? And there you can see from this picture, you know, you've got a couple of patients there. This patient, I believe, this person here, I believe he's a 50-something staff nurse. I know what you're thinking. But they do. Pajamas, they make us look older, don't they? They truly, really do. And when she started this and she put that out on Twitter, then more people started replicating what it must be like. And then you started seeing it going absolutely everywhere. I love these photographs here, the bottom left, where you've got, bottom, yeah, on your side, you know, patient in the center. We finally, after many years of hunting, finally found Wally. He's here, second from the right. That person will probably have a so they'll have some contract out of me for that, telling them that. But what it does is creating fun. And this is now in Blacktown in Australia. There are 36 health districts around Victoria that are running it. It is running in Queensland, Northern Territories, New Zealand, Canada. I was on the phone to John Hopkins yesterday in Baltimore. And people have picked it up and are running with it because it's fun. And this is Aileen Horgan in Cork. This time 2 years ago, she had 2 patients who were both had dementia, both waiting for care home placements. They got them up, dressed and moving. Their physical and cognitive function improved to a point where instead of going to a home, they both went back to their home. What would it be like if 1 or 2 patients a day could go back to where they should be? And you see it rolling out into across in Beaumont Hospital, and you can see Courtney's poster. I love this one here. Don't leave your identity at the door. Keep it with you. That's a really very important message. Because what we're collectively doing is we're changing the conversation with the public. Because for 70 years we have said to people, come to hospital, you'll be safe. And now we're going, yeah, about that. You know, we've said to people, take home your clothes because there's no place for them. And now we're saying, yeah, about that too. This is a conversation we are changing in the public, and that's an important point. And it is one thing all nurses love, let's be honest, and you know, many therapists, we love badges. Pete Gordon created these. He became known as Postman Pete, the EndPJ. They became so popular, they were worth about half a kidney on the black market, because everyone loved to wear them. And Rosie Chilvers, you know, this is about people following what they believe will make it better in a heme-onc ward in Portsmouth. Get Up, Get Dressed, Get Moving was coined by a geriatrician called Amit Arora, a fantastic person there. And the more you have fun, because what EndPJparalysis does is got 3 things that Henry Timms and Jeremy Hymans, who wrote New Power, what Helen Bevan describes as one of the most important leadership books of the decade. And he gave a keynote 2 weeks ago in Glasgow at the IHI conference. And he talked about what is it about social movements, what are the elements that make them successful. If you think about Black Lives Matter, Me Too, you know, all those sorts of things. He said they have 3 bits. First of all, there's an action. EndPJparalysis is a call to action. Secondly, they're connected. They enable people to connect to the message on an emotional level as much as it is on an intellectual one. And the third bit he describes as key is they are extensible. And what he means by that is people can localize it to what they interpret. So what's been done in the Northern Care Alliance is a recreation with freedom and to make it better locally. The posters in Canada have got a very Canadian theme. And it's about people interpreting as they choose to get the message out. And here was a variant on that theme, because this was on Independence Day 2 years ago, and the then Director of Nursing, Dee Fowler, in Shrewsbury, I said to her on Twitter, I said, oh, this is in Nursing Times, absolutely love your T-shirt, Dee. That could be the anthem of EndPJparalysis. And I said, oh, I've got a couple of other songs, maybe we'll do that. And within no time, people are piling in ideas for songs. And then Michelle Smith, a comms person, created a Spotify playlist. I like to move it, get up, stand up. You don't have to take our clothes off. I particularly like that one. You can interpret that in more than one way as well, if you choose. So there was a couple of lines from the Bohemian Rhapsody was sent to me, and 25 minutes later, and I didn't know I could do this, I rewrote the words of Bohemian Rhapsody. You know the way you do. Is this the real life or PJ fantasy? Caught in a pat slide, no escape from reality. You know, Mama just killed a man, put some PJs on his bed, made him wear him, now he's dead, and on it goes. And at the very end, you know that's a powerful song, as we know, and you know at the very, very end of Bohemian Rhapsody, it finishes on that. And it finished with, patient time it matters, anyone can see. Patient time it matters, it really, really matters to me. And out of nowhere, a couple of years ago, I was doing a talk in Cheshire, mid-Cheshire, and these awesome women had a flash mob, and they sang it. And what they may have lacked in vocal prowess, they did not lack in enthusiasm. And it was a fantastic, and they're the Dolan sisters. Some of you will be old enough to know what that cultural reference is about. And you know, this is how a thing is. You don't wake up one morning saying, geez, I really fancy starting a global social movement. I haven't done that for ages. It doesn't work like that. But I can tell you this, if you're going to start something, you may as well go in boots and all. So International Nurses Day, last year, there I was in Wagga Wagga, having just been interviewed on the telly with my wee willy winky number. That was not. That's the. This, by the way, would be Elaine's equivalent. You know, just noting that. And but that is also Elaine's. This would be the teddy bear as well. That's not mine. But what it's about is actually creating fun. Because what happened? Where did the fun go? How many of you remember doing wheelchair races? And, you know, jumping onto a drip stand and running and see how far you're getting, sending the male nurses, student nurses off to pick up some fallopian tubes. It took us a long while to work that one out. And somehow we seem to have lost the fun, the crack, the Irish variety, by the way. And we need to get it back. It's about joy in work, and often it's the little moments that make the difference. It's not contrived. It's about making a choice of our attitudes towards things. So what happened then? Well, we started with a big PDSA in the east of England, and then did a national, sponsored by Jane and the three other chief nurses of the UK, and we created a 70-day, 1 million patient challenge, which I have to say NCA, Northern Care Alliance, absolutely rocked it. Totally did. And we had an app, we still have an app, and put a name, and all it was 2 questions. How many patients are dressed in clothes at midday? And how many of them are mobilizing around the bed, to the shower, to the toilet? That was it. Non-patient identifiable details, that's what it did. Sonia Noshin, who I see, Sonia Sparkles is her website. She's just been nominated for a HSJ Patient Safety Award. It'd be fantastic to see her win that. And she created these pledge cards and a whole load of things that people were printing off these things. She created these kind of posters as well. She makes me look 12. I love her. And, you know, telling some really important messaging. So it's about spreading that message to patients and the public about how do we make it work. I particularly love that Steve and Alison showed this at a conference, and, you know, you can see from around here, we're continuing to support the campaign. This is Mr. Gallagher, who said, getting up and dress is a real motivator. It gets me ready for the day. You get activity coordinators who've done some phenomenal work around here. And it's really exciting when it's about permission. because everyone feels they have permission. I don't own EndPJparalysis. I'm really clear about that. And because I don't own it, because I don't want to, it means we all do. It means nobody needs permission to make it better. And I think, and Hilary and I have had this conversation quite a number of times about permission and the importance of permission, people feeling they have permission. Because in many ways, if you're in a role that you have staff or you have seniority, your real job title is you're a director of permission giving. It's about creating a climate where people feel safe to do something to make it even better. Here's Claire Connell, an occupational therapist in East Sussex, and I just love this. She built on another piece of work by another OT, and it was about having at the Suffolk show, and people, getting young children to make pledges about their grandparents to keep them up and hydrated and moving. You just imagine the conversations at home, couldn't you? Nana, have another cup of tea. Granddad, go on, have another pint. Just have some fluids. It's about creating a space where people can have the right conversations in a safe space. So where did we get to at the end of 70 days? Well, we had over 710,000 people who were mobilized and 703,000 dressed. And that leads to another key point, which is we may have missed a target, but we sure did hit the point. And to my mind, the bottom number in many respects is the bigger cultural game changer, because suddenly we had huge numbers of people who were dressed. It became normative, not exceptional. Northern Care Alliance had 6% of the total number in the country, in the whole of the UK. That is how good you are up here. And absolute tribute to Elaine, to Steve, to Alison and others who did this. But what about the bigger system impact? Well, we've been very clear not to claim correlation equals causation, but you remember the Christmas and the winter before, we had The Beast from the East, which sounded like a dodgy Andrew Lloyd Webber musical, didn't it? And, it was horrendous. But then you started to see where you've got 2/3 of the patients with 2 standard deviations outside of mean, a significant drop, even allowing for seasonal variation of improving into the spring. An even bigger drop in terms of the number of patients waiting in hospital for more than 7 days. Patients waiting less, the number of beds that are occupied dropping, which meant that people could get into hospital more quickly. Manifest here that the 4-hour performance improved, stranded patients and beds occupied improved, time to treatment in emergency departments got faster as well. So these have ripple effects at whole system level. And what about around here? What are the impacts that it have? And I think, again, absolute credit to Northern Care Alliance for the fantastic data collection that was done. But you see this kind of thing, a reduction in falls. Because if people are maintaining quads muscle mass, they are less likely to fall. They're maintaining their aerobic capacity. They're maintaining fitness. They are less likely to fall. Significant reduction in pressure sores, and although the numbers were low, as has been acknowledged, it's still a significant, because if you're not lying down, you're not getting pressure sores. It kind of makes sense. What about length of stay, one of the cardinal markers? And I know Alison and Steve, you looked at the 5 most engaged wards, and there was an even bigger significant reduction here. But you look at the length of stay, and EndPJparalysis was part of it. It was also things like what matters to me, and a number, there's a whole suite of things that were done. But that means that somebody goes home sooner. In the most engaged wards, it was a 2.1 day, 19% reduction in length of stay. What this all means is this: people get home to loved ones we will never meet. They spend more of what might be their last 1,000 days with the ones they love most. And no matter how kind, how caring, how compassionate we may be, where would our patients mostly want to be? In their own bed, with their own kith and kin. Reductions, or the normalization of mobilization, where you see this is the liver, the intestinal failure unit, and you see the significant and sustained increase, because this is the culture. This is the cultural shift that occurs. And this is the poster girl of the campaign. How cool is she? And how cool would that be, to be feeling like that because you were up and dressed? So what happens next? Well, what happens next is we're going to go global. So from the 10th to the 12th of July, we'll be having a global online summit. And we will divide the world into 3 parts, Australasia, Europe, Middle East, North America. There'll be 8-hour slots every, over the 24 hours. We'll do it 3 times. There'll be online content, online learning, online sharing. We're looking for ambassadors, we're looking for clinicians, we're looking to have scientific committee members. There'll be a call going out this month for it. The NHS Horizons team, Helen Bevan's team, are working with us. And this is really, really exciting. And you know what? It's also incredibly scary. But you know what? Why wouldn't you dream out loud at high volume? Because what we're trying to do is globally change a conversation where it is okay to be up, dressed, and moving. And this man here is one of my favorites. I've never met this man. This man is Jack Byrnes. And great permission, he was had his photograph taken, and there he was, up and dressed. And you know, you look at this man and you think, Jack, what was going on with the tattoos? Because this is a man you want to know. You want to know, why are you wearing a belt and braces? What's that about? Because he's no longer a patient, is he? He's Jack. He's got a backstory. He's had a life. And here's another thing. If Jack was 70 years of age, I don't know Jack, but supposing he's a 70-year-old man. In 1969, he was a 20-year-old man. He wasn't listening to Dame Vera Lynn and wartime songs. He was listening to The Who, The Stones, The Beatles, Clearden's Clearwater Revival, the first song by, Fleetwood Mac. That was his music, that was his soundtrack. And every time we look at an old person in a bed and think, oh, actually we have to remember these are people with a rock and roll heartbeat. Somebody who's 80 was listening to Bill Haley and the Comets at the start of rock and roll. And if we reframed how we think about patients, they've had lives, they've had lovers, they've had energy, they've had vitality. They are not frail and old. You go up to an old person and say you're frail and see how that one goes for you. But do it from a long distance. But what we have instead is the unintended consequence of ages and ageist language. We talk about the demographic time bomb as we're waiting for old people to just blow up. Or this tsunami of aging as if it's their fault that young people can't have a house. You know, it's not. Actually, we should be celebrating the fact that so many people live so long. And as there's been a compression of morbidity. In the past, if you lived to the age of 75 and you had 15 years of ill health, you would have had 1/5 of your life in ill health. Now, if you live to the age of 90, it'll still be about 15 years, but it's 1/6 of your life, not 1/5. It's been a compression of the morbidity. Older people will help and rescue our health system. But what do we talk about? Instead, we talk about them having acopia. You know, it should be banned as a term. Bed blockers blames the people for a system failure. Actually, most people who've got a bigger problem is aphasia. Suffering from dementia to diminish somebody. Frailty. Frailty to the lens of a clinician is very different from it is from the public, who see it as something much more pejorative. And frailty comes from both Latin and medieval French, meaning fragile and poor morals. And David Oliver, I commend to you as well in that space. But what about the battlefield metaphors of the body? You know, we talk about the war against cancer, battling disease, fighting infection, aggressive treatments, immune defensive, and then we call people brave. And actually, that's not okay. It pains me when I see on my Facebook page, oh, they fought bravely. Actually, cancer isn't a moral issue. It's not a moral judgment. It's not that somebody was brave and wasn't brave enough. Actually, when you think about it, when you die, cancer dies with you. So at the end, it's a tie. We should be rethinking our language, because our language is so very, very important. And how we approach language. You know, we talk about cardiac massage as if it's something mildly erotic, when in fact it's like battering somebody's chest and maybe breaking their ribs. Because every single person in healthcare makes a difference to someone or something, and none of us are off duty for a heartbeat, not for a moment. How you behave in the canteen to somebody, you're noticed. Nobody is frontline and nobody's backline. We've got healthcare staff, because to use the term frontline infers there's a backline that doesn't matter as much. But actually, everyone in healthcare matters Everyone has got something to do with patient safety. If you're in finance, your job is to make sure that people get paid, so when they go up to a patient, they're not thinking about their mortgage. It's ensuring that we do the right thing, because the last 1,000 days matters. And as I draw this lecture to a conclusion, it comes from this. Now, back, it's 11 years now, and I was in teaching in Christchurch in New Zealand, where I've spent much of my time. I'm Director of Service Improvement in one of the top 5 most integrated health systems in the world, the Canterbury Health System. It's a brilliant, brilliant system. And talked to a group of elder care nurses, doctors, therapists, managers about waste and valuing the value or the waste that occurs in overproduction, overprocessing, motion, inventory, but actually the biggest waste often is time. And what popped up completely fully formed when I was talking, and out of nowhere, was this construct I call the last 1,000 days. Because if you're a man, you can expect to live to about the age of 78. And if you're a woman, you can expect to live to about the age of 83. But supposing you're a 75-year-old man or an 80-year-old woman, what have you got left? Well, what you have is 1,000 days. Now, I know that if you survive to the age of 10, you have survived your childhood. Life expectancy goes up. It's also well established that those who have the most birthdays live longest. Now you know why I'm a professor. But actually, think about it in hospital settings. What of many people? 1/3 of medical patients are in their last year of life. 48% of people who are over the age of 85 will die within 1 year of a hospital admission. And I think we treat older people particularly as if they have all the time in the world, and yet to my mind, they are the ones in the most hurry. Because actually what this is really about is the morality of not stealing people's time. Because every day they lie longer in hospital than they must is stealing their time. Every hour they wait to go home is stealing their time. Those worries and fears they have when they're waiting for the result of a test that they've had is time stolen that can't be recovered. So our collective responsibility, I would argue, is to value patients' time, because while our time is busy, our patients' time is sacred. But there's also the other side of the coin, which is our own time and our own lives. And when I was 18, I read Grapes of Wrath, and there's a fantastic line in there by John Steinbeck, and he says, "Far away in the future, the 1,000 lives we could have led are waiting for us to show up, but when we get there, it'll only have been one of them." Because each of us in this room could have made different choices with our lives. Each of us could have chosen lives, let's face it, especially in healthcare, where we could have done jobs where we'd been paid more for less effort. We could have done jobs where we wouldn't be missing family events, we wouldn't be missing going out with loved ones or our mates because we were on call, at work, studying. We could have chosen jobs, let's face it, we could have actually not thought about the job the minute we walked out the door, but instead what we collectively chose was a life of service. We collectively chose to be part of something bigger than all of us. And I think, when we look back on our own last 1,000 days, we'll be able to say with truth, I may not have got rich, I certainly didn't get famous, but I mattered. I mattered to my family, I mattered to my community, I mattered to the profession I was so proud to call my own. And I think if you can say I was loved, I mattered, I was enough, if you can say I was part of something bigger than me and what my contribution did was made others better for them, then I think what you've had is a life of purpose, a life of value, a life of worth. And so the most famous Kiwi of all had a fantastic line, and I think it's so true for all of us. Because no matter where you are, it's very much about believing you can make a difference. And belief is very, very important. Your belief that you have permission to make a change. It's not waiting for the great leaders like Elaine to walk around. How many thousands work in NCA, you know, wandering around, and she is highly visible, or Margaret as the dean. It's not about waiting for the leaders to come, but actually, because leadership starts within. The best leaders are often not places where you expect. It's not a title. Leadership is, and power. They're not about those things. What they're really about is influence. That's where the art is. That's where the joy is. And when you believe you can make a difference, it's like Eleanor Roosevelt said, when you believe, well, you know, when the minute you believe you can't, you're right. And in fact, that was Henry Ford, I believe. But I think what's really important is to recognize you matter. And I really struggle when people talk about students being the future of nursing. How many students here today? I don't buy that argument that you're the future. I've never have. And the reason is this. You're not the future, you're the now. You're not empty vessels waiting to be filled with nursing knowledge. You bring something to the party. Your leadership doesn't start tomorrow, it starts now. You are us now, not tomorrow. That's why you're not the future. You are its present as well as its future. That's why you matter. We need you. We want you. I can tell you this. After 37 years in nursing, I'm so proud I'm a nurse. And after 37 years, I became an overnight success. But I know this too. We are all blessed doing what we do. We are part of something incredible in this system. But in the end of the day, you know, when you start your nursing degree and you think, oh my God, 3 years, I'll never finish. And you look back and think, oh my gosh, you know, people like Elaine, how many years now? I think you've said it's 40, 42. It goes in, well, only because you're on in pediatrics, because you've told us all before. But actually, it felt like it went like a heartbeat, hasn't it, Elaine? It just feels like it as well for Margaret. And it will. But know this, never feel that it's too big a mountain to climb, because it's not the height of a mountain. Never look at the height of a mountain till you reach the top. And then you'll see how low it was. Because in the end, it's not the mountain we conquer, but ourselves. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, how did that go?